Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me to this keynote presentation. And today I want to present you something about how we could utilize the adaptive potential of trees for assisted gene flow and climate smart forestry. Climate change, actually, it's not required to tell you much more about that. We already have experienced about 1 degree Celsius increase within the last 100 years. And as we all know and have experienced within the past years, we might get an additional increase in temperature up to 4 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And these numbers are not just numbers being in a slide, but they can already be seen in the forests that we are managing. This is just a picture of a forest site in northern Austria, where bark beetle reduced Norway spruce populations in a drastic amount. But we also see this in other tree species, as for example in the Austrian pine, Pinus nigra, where we have seen some decline within the last 5 years approximately. We see this in beech as well. Beeches, especially in lower elevations, where some forest managers have observed a decline in large old forests for more than 20 years already. And besides the direct effects of the climate change, we have also seen effects of globalization, for example, how much the ash decline reduced the ash populations within the last decades. These are just some pictures. There was a very new study coming up last week, which also showed that these numbers already shape our European forests. For example, a new study shows that there is a large trend in the increase in forest disturbances within the last 30 years. There was a significant trend in that the size of disturbance was increasing, and also the disturbance frequency across Europe increased throughout the last 30 years. If we then think about what these climate change that we are still going to expect within the next 100 or several hundred years might mean for our forests, we can look back to our heritage and to the tree species and tree communities that we had in the past and how they developed throughout the last several million years. This here is a slide from a study on the cause of climate within the last 60 million years on a worldwide scale. And overall, it shows that that mean global temperature in about 60 million years ago was much higher than it is today, but decreased through time, through the last 60 million years, until about 1 to 2 million years ago, when the time of the ice ages appeared, and we had the climate fluctuations with several glaciations in the northern hemisphere. And if we are looking a little bit deeper, then we see that we are today on this yellow line here, and this is our pre-industrial climate. And from this historical climate, now we are going to move up either to the climate of like 10 to 20 million years ago, if we are lucky and we are able to reduce our global greenhouse gas emissions, or we even might move up to a climate that we have seen just more than 40 to 50 million years ago. So that means our human activities will return the natural developments of about the last 40 million years. So if we look at these numbers and then check what happened during that time in our European forests, then we can compare the tree genera, the diversity of different tree species and tree genera, which appeared or which occurred in Europe and other northern hemisphere forests during that time with what we have today. And the interesting thing is that before the ice ages, around 20 to 40 million years ago, in Europe we had around 130 different tree genera, and today from these tree genera only 29% of them survived, while in other northern hemisphere forests there is a much larger amount of tree species and tree genera still surviving. And there has been, as many of you already know, there has been several theories why especially Europe has seen such a drastic amount of decrease in tree species diversity. And the main causes is probably that there was, in the course of the several glaciations, there was a mismatch of the species niches and changing environments. And of course, there have always been lacks in adaptation and migration of the tree species to face their current environments. And what we already see today in our projections of climate change and already the ongoing causes of tree decline is that climate change alters tree species distributions. And we also have studied within the past decades a lot what different natural processes might contribute to the adaptation. Then we have found that the most natural processes are not fast enough to allow adaptation. And this is, we know that genetic selection adaptation is not strong enough to allow adaptation in one generation. Migration is not fast enough, and also gene flow might not be able to cross these huge areas that we need for a fast adaptation. In a past project, we have assumed this together, and we have defined that actually to sustain, to defend our forest ecosystems in climate change and to maintain the ecosystems that we have, we might go for different adaptation strategies. One adaptation strategy might be assisted migration and the use of climate resilient genotypes. It might also require strong thinning measures. We might also see certain areas in our forests where these assisted migration and thinning measures might not be enough, but here we need to go plant other native species and more species mixtures. And if this also does not help, and we will see areas where we will lose our forests because we are already at the lower boundary of the forest distribution, there we might need to plant non-native tree species in order to have the same forest ecosystem services provided by our forests. These are options to adapt our forests to climate change. At the same time, forests are not only seen as a problem in climate change, but they are also be seen as a mitigation option. And there is, I just want to cite one example because it's also now in the political frame. Very often see that this is a study of a Swiss group which showed that on a worldwide scale, there is a huge option for tree restoration. And if we are going to use this tree restoration, it might help to remove significant amounts of carbon out of the air. And it might also work as a kind of geoengineering project. This study also has been highly criticized by many people, and you will find lots of comments in on this science study, which tackle different aspects of the study, and also the authors also had at the end to reduce the potential restoration potential of this project. However, it still shows that forest restoration and afforestation project could be a significant part of climate mitigation actions. And these options have also been discussed very recently by the European Union which discuss now the tree restoration potential within the European Union. They have brought the same authors together in a European study, which is at the moment under public consultation. And just for you to see what are the key messages of this study is that the authors have found out that that Europe could harbor forests on an area of up to 59 million hectares to be covered by trees. And they estimate that we would need 36 billion major trees to do this. This would be a huge amount of trees to be planted and a huge also option to store carbon in future, more forests than we had today. At the moment, it's not sure how much this study is going to put set into practice, but what we know, it is being discussed as part of the Green Deal, and there will be a realization. So the realization is very likely, at least partly, not in its total content probably. And to be true, even if the amount of forests to be planted is very, very optimistic, if we compare it to other geoengineering options, planting of forests as a nature-based alternative sounds rather very positive as compared what you could expect from other geoengineering measures. Besides discussing reforestation and afforestation programs, an important part of forest management within the last years discussed also the options of climate smart forestry. And this climate smart forestry does not only look for forests and tree and wood production, but it considers the whole value chain of forestry and the wood and energy production. And it's built on three major objectives. On the one side, it's aiming at reducing and removing greenhouse gas emissions. On the other, it aims at adapting and building forest resilience to climate change. And thirdly, it is also looking for increasing forest productivity and the incomes of forest owners in a very sustainable way. And the study and ideas of the climate smart forestry are based on recent figures of forest growth and forest area growth within the European Union, and on the calculated carbon removals of the European forests and of the wood-based products that have been produced by harvesting these parts of these forests. These first slides just were just to show you that we as scientists working on forest genetics and forest genetic conservation, and we have huge challenges ahead of us. And in the next part of my presentation, I show you just on a few examples how we can tackle these challenges and discuss let's say, the open questions and that we have to solve in order to contribute to these challenges. I will just show now 4 examples. One is on genetic conservation. A second example is on assisted migration and gene flow. A third is on understanding genetic variation of drought reaction. And finally, I also will discuss the options for silvicultural adaptation by using let's say, right genetic material. Genetic conservation, I was very happy to contribute a couple of years ago on the development of the first YouthGIS project together with the partners at Biodiversity International. And I think Europe has already a very good network of genetic conservation units across Europe. And after we have done some studies on the minimum requirements and the ecological gap analysis, I was also happy to contribute with a study on the vulnerability of these genetic conservation units in climate change, where we are able to model current
and projected future distributions of the different species, and identify for each conservation unit their vulnerability in climate change. And what we could do with this analysis was that we identified which of the genetic conservation units are expected to be winners. So that means they might have better climate in the future than they had in the past. But we have also seen that the majority of the genetic conservation units are loser units. That means the species, the target species conserved within these genetic conservation units are expected to see a decline in their favorability within these sites. That means they are endangered in the future. And it was also interesting to see that the endangered forests are mainly in the refugial areas of tree populations covering the highest diversity, the highest genetic diversity as far as we know. That means genetic conservation on a European scale requires also in the future, and much more than it has been in the past, a range-wide monitoring. It also might require a refinement of the unit selection based on more appropriate diversity measures, and especially on the tested local adaptations. And it might need to be accompanied by ex situ conservation and assisted gene flow and migration actions in order to look especially at those sites where which are already at the borders of the tree species distribution limits today. With this, I'm coming to another option that has been widely discussed worldwide. This is assisted migration and gene flow as options to conserve the genetic diversity of the trees, but also as an option to maintain let's say the forest stability in the future climate. I'm not going into details. Mostly it's being discussed as if there is, in this picture you see the southern graph, which is the current tree species distribution, and you see the expected future tree species distribution. And if the species moves to a new area and we support the species to move to a new area, we would call it assisted species migration. However, there is also within the tree species present and expected future range, there is also a need to transfer populations and seeds and seedlings within this area that we can call assisted gene flow. And there might be very in the south at the warmest end of the tree species distribution. There might also be requirement for ex situ conservation measures. But how far we are in Europe with this assisted migration and gene flow? Are we ready for implementation? Most importantly, in the first part, we have to understand which tree species harbor significant adaptive variation related to climate conditions, and especially in particular to climate extremes. Secondly, we have to identify valuable populations for seed transfer, and we have to identify methods to match them with future habitats. Of course, within such models, we have to identify what are the climatic limits for seed transfer. And we have to discuss with our stakeholders on a national and international level if there are legal constraints in seed transfer. And of course, we have to understand what is the potential of silvicultural measures to increase the genetic potential of the tree populations. In a past project, we worked on the assisted migration within the SUSTRI project. And in the first step, we aimed at developing a harmonized database of provenance trials across Europe, where we were able altogether to produce a database with 587 genetic trials and data from 7 different tree species. And these database, here is, for example, the data
from Norway spruce, where we had nearly 250 trials in more than 1,000 tested seed sources. These data set can now be used to develop universal climate response model and to identify the factors which are important for local adaptation and forest growth, and then to develop models of how different provenances should be used and transferred in climate change. I just want to show this as this one explanation with Norway spruce. We have used all the available data and also the current tree species distribution in Europe to delineate the tree species distribution in 11 different climatically similar regions. And then we used our universal response model for Norway spruce to predict the best seed source under current climate and to identify the best seed source for future climate. And with this knowledge, we can also then use it to model the productivity under a specific climate change scenario. And this, for example, shows you, this next slide shows you the productivity in the future, or the changes in productivity on the future climate. And on the left side, you see the productivity, the decreasing productivity by using local seed sources on this side. And however, if we are going to use our model to select the best seed source for future climate, we see that in many areas of Europe, you would still see an increasing productivity with the future climate. However, many models that we use so far are mainly based on climate alone. So we have to ask ourselves, are these good enough, or also do we have to consider other environmental conditions of the tree species and the seed sources to understand their potential transfer into other regions? There is unfortunately not many studies on this field right now. And we have done a study in a couple of years, 2 years ago, where we tested on different drivers of local adaptation, and we tested whether rather climate or soil conditions are the drivers for local adaptation and forest growth. And what we found with using a structural equation model and based on several hundred of different trials established in Austria was that actually climate and soil of the planting location were found to be the dominant drivers of forest growth, where the provenance origin played only a minor role for the growth itself. For the provenance origin, the soil of provenance origin played no role at all, while the climate of the provenance origin played also a significant role, but smaller than the site climate itself. And interestingly, we found that the relative effects of climate and soil vary among the different provenance groups. So overall, we have found that, of course, across a large climatic gradient from low elevations in Austria to high elevations, of course, the climate of the sites was the major driver of the growth itself. The soil was also a driver, but the climate origin from the seed sources was also significant, while the soil conditions of the seed origin did not play any role. So that means that with the models, with the transfer models that we have developed so far, we can nicely live, and they give us a good overview of what can be done. Besides understanding the general transfer of seeds and seed sources across Europe, we also have to understand in the future the genetic variation to extreme events, as for example, long-standing drought periods. And because we have seen in the last years that long-standing drought periods, especially that we have seen in Central Europe, are a major driver of forest disturbances, and these forest disturbances are the drivers of forest change. So we need to understand how our different tree species and how the genetic material in these tree species, if they are adapted to extreme drought events, and if these adaptation can be used to for assisted migration or for other local adaptation activities. We have tested this in the last years within several trials that we were established in the northeastern Austria. Northeastern Austria is an area with which already in the past experienced significant drought periods. It has only a precipitation from 500 to 600 millimeter, and in the past had a temperature between 8 and 10 degrees Celsius. And we have in this area several provenances from Norway spruce, silver fir, European larch, and Douglas fir. And as you can see on these figures, where we show the species occurrence together with the site occurrence, you see that our trials are located close to the warmest and driest region of the tree species distribution. So they should, if there is a signal of local adaptation to droughts, we might see it at these sites. And here's just a picture of the different drought periods that have been observed within this region. We already have seen very good and strong drought periods in the early 90s, in the year 2000, and of course in the year 2003, where all sites experienced severe to extreme droughts according to the standardized precipitation index. And with getting tree cores from all these provenances, we were able to measure the resistance and also the recovery of the trees of the different provenances and species for these drought periods. Here you see just first a comparison among the different tree species. We had a severe drought period in 1993, and then we had an extreme drought in the year 2000 and another extreme drought in the year 2003. You see the higher the value is, the higher the resistance is, the better a tree species behaves within a drought. And you see that Douglas fir among these 4 tree species was the best in all 3 tree species. The second best was silver fir, and the worst one was Norway spruce in this region. If we look at recovery, it's the same. The higher the recovery is, the better a tree species recovers after a drought was ongoing. And here you see that silver fir was the species with the best recovery at all 3 drought periods. And in the first 1993 drought, there was also Norway spruce nicely showing good recovery, but it was a little bit worse in the following droughts. But interestingly, Douglas fir was not as good as the other species if it comes to recovery. This was just a comparison among the species, but we also checked about the differences among the provenances of these experiments. And interestingly, we found that a significant variation among provenances has only been found for silver fir and for Norway spruce, while we could not find significant differences among larch and among Douglas fir provenances. In addition, we looked at the variation within the provenances as given by the degree of genetic determination, by the repeatability. That means how good the recovery or resistance observed within one drought period was also found to be good or worse within one of the other drought periods. And this is just for an example for Norway spruce, where we found strong differences in repeatability among provenances, indicating varying selection patterns. So repeatability can also be used
as a measure for heritability, and values up to 0.4 show there is significant genetic variation within the individual provenances, which gives hope that there is a selection, that an ongoing selection within these provenances is possible. And we can also show this, the mean repeatability across provenances of the different species. And interestingly, we found the highest mean repeatabilities in larch for recovery, and in Norway spruce for the highest value for resistance. While the different provenances of Douglas fir showed overall the lowest repeatabilities across all provenances. So to resume that, we found significant variation in drought response among provenances of spruce and silver fir, but not for larch and Douglas fir. That means that for these species, assisted migration would support also drought adaptation. Secondly, we found a significant degree of genetic determination in some, but not all provenances. That means there was probably a varying selection in the source populations, which is also supported by the varying phenotypic correlations. And this knowledge would justify breeding activities for drought resistance. Moreover, it also opens options for silvicultural adaptation within the existing sites. And I just want to explain this as one small example, how we might be able to utilize the observed additive genetic variation and the trait correlations between drought and resistance. And what you see here is we have, in addition to measuring resistance in the different drought years, we also have other traits evaluated, like height, DBH, increment, wood density, late wood, early wood, and so on. This table just shows you the trait correlations in the spruce trial. And if you're plotting these for one single, for our different provenances in our Norway spruce trial, you see the correlation between the resistance in the year 2000 and the annual growth, annual increment, in the mean annual increment. And we could think about making the mean resistance on the side is 0.25 in the year 2000. And now let's think about what would be if we would do a normal thinning to remove the smaller trees in this area, like it is usually being done in many sites. And with this, we were able to increase the mean resistance of this population already to 0.29. That means this regular thinning would be able to genetically improve drought resistance of this population, but it has to be tested in further experimental and modeling studies if these options are really will really have a significant effect on these populations. The effect to link the genetic selection by normal thinning would also be very helpful, as tree density and the reduction of tree density is being seen also as a very important variable to improve the stability of the forest stands in climate change. This here is an example of our test sites where we have a silvicultural trial with single clones which have been planted in 3 different tree densities. And already here, with just one single clone, we could easily find that the thinning options and the different densities under which they were planted and managed have a significant effect on their fitness and productivity at this site. I just showed now 4 examples of what we have done in the past in order to assess past trials and to understand a little bit
whether the provenances and the genetic material has an effect on their forest grow, and if there is a local adaptation. However, we see that with the climate that we already have, with the already ongoing climate change, that we require new test sites, new plantation sites in order to test further hypotheses and to find out the best planting material, the best tree species, but especially also the best seedling material for these elevations. And this is just an example of a new trial plantation established at high elevations in 2017, 2018, with more than 30 tree species and different provenances being planted, also in different mixtures, where we have lots of data now available. And we just started in the last year another new trial plantation at lower elevations in Lower Austria. So, oh, sorry, it should be like 300 meters, not 1,600 meters, where we established on 5 hectares, also around 30 different tree species and provenances. You can follow this site on our Instagram account Klimaforschungswald if you're interested in this. And with this, I think I should come close to the end and to come to some conclusions. Climate change and the fight against climate change and its consequences are among the largest challenges in human history. Forest genetics is at the outmost frontier to deliver solutions for forest adaptation and climate change mitigations. Understanding and identifying genetic variation, and this includes understanding and identifying genetic variation and its local adaptations. It includes conserving and monitoring these variations for future generations. It especially means that we should and need to provide knowledge for assisted migration and gene flow in order to adapt our existing forests. It also means that we need to adapt our existing national and transnational legislation in order to make assisted migration and gene flow happen. And especially if we look at these large afforestation programs of the European Union and of other interest groups, it means that we need to provide seeds and seedlings for large reforestation programs independent from national borders. At the moment, we would not be able to deliver enough seeds and seedlings for these programs. We also have to think about reviving clonal propagation programs for faster tree breeding and seedling production, establishing transnational seed certification schemes, because people in the different countries need to know that they get the seeds that they wanted. Also, seedling production in nurseries and the reforestation methods itself needs to be improved. And not last but not least, overall, we need to integrate our genetic knowledge into the silvicultural management in the long term. And with this, I want to end my presentation. I will just shortly want to thank my year-long co-workers and partners from different institutions, especially the project partners from the Forestry project. And of course, the different funding organizations who helped me to finance these and other projects. And that finally, I thank you for your interest in our work. Thank you very much.